I think there are theories in psychology, so this can be a very existential thing that present information in a way that makes it sound like you're determined. You're determined by your childhood, you're determined by your parents, you're determined by your environment. And although they do significantly impact who you become, I do not think that they determine who you become as a whole. I think they give you information, they give you hurdles, they give you wounds, they give you support depending on a bunch of factors, but you still get to decide who you are. And so I think we just need to make sure that we don't feel locked in by our past and understand that we have more freedom than we think.
Howdy, everyone. It's your host, Polly Siegel. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, certified addiction specialist, and master level trained mindfulness practitioner. I own a counseling practice in both Colorado and Illinois, and I specialize in trauma, OCD, and anxiety. If you live in either of those two states, feel free to reach out to me for a consultation and we can begin the therapeutic journey together. Now on to the good shit. Welcome to season 3 of Shit Talkin' Shrinks. Gosh, I'm so excited. I will be featuring experts in the healing space, and we're discussing a variety of mental health topics, the human experience, and society at large, while creating levity along the way. Get ready to laugh, learn a lot, and change your life for good. Hello, everyone, for another fabulous episode of Shit Talking Shrinks. I have an extra special guest today, and I mean that with a full heart and sincerity. I have Dr. Sara Kuburic with me, who's an existential psychotherapist, author of It's on Me, and known as the Millennial Therapist on Instagram, which has 1.7 million followers. And I was just telling Sara before we pushed the record button that I had discovered her account in 2020 when I was giving a presentation about millennials. And a person in the crowd said, "Wait, have you heard of the Millennial Therapist on Instagram?" And I'm like, "No." And then, of course, immediately checked it out and was like, "This chick is so fucking badass and amazing." And I've been a fan ever since.
You're so sweet. Like, that is so kind of you to say. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You obviously, I mean, your book, it's on my to-do list to read, and I'm hoping we can kind of incorporate some of the themes of the book. But today we're really focusing on authenticity and how authenticity can be paired with slowing down. And we live in a culture where grinding and hustling and moving a mile a minute is what's celebrated and embraced, and slowing down is oftentimes judged. So I'm kind of curious your take on what slowing down means.
Yeah. And this is to be super fair and transparent. I think slowing down is not something I started practicing till about 6 months ago. And if you look at my life, you're like, well, that's not a great ratio. And I think for me, slowing down has to be paired with listening to yourself. In terms of, it was time for me to slow down. And I think everyone has different phases in their lives where their body, their mind, their spirit, wherever it is asking them to pace themselves. And for me, that happened now. And I think if you listen to that voice, that's very connected to your authenticity. So I don't think that slowing down has to be authentic, but it can be.
Yeah. What I appreciated what you just said around is that like slowing down is being in tune with like the internal signals, that we get these internal signals of like, hey, pause, take it down a notch. But I find that most people just plow through that and ignore it. Is that what you find?
Absolutely. I mean, I think most of us do it. And I think we do it for two primary reasons. One is, I think being busy and accomplishing things is a form of escapism. I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk about the second reason, which is like societal pressure and expectations and trying to fit the mold and belong, which absolutely that exists. And we need to validate that. But the second reason I find more interesting in terms of, I think a lot of us do it to ourselves very intentionally. And that's because we don't want to sit with the pain, we don't want to sit with the decision, we don't want to sit with whatever it is. And so we're escaping our own life by just being busy all the time. And I think that that not only prevents us from being authentic, but actually prevents us from having a very fulfilled life. So sometimes you'll see extremely busy individuals feel like they're not accomplishing enough, feel like whatever they do doesn't matter. And a lot of it is because it doesn't, in terms of it doesn't to them. And that's why they feel that way. And so if you're someone who stacks their schedule and when they see a free afternoon, gets uncomfortable and has to see a friend or picks up their laptop because they don't know what to do with themselves, or and sometimes we laugh because there's people who are like, I wish I had an afternoon off. Like there's absolutely no scenario in which this happens for me, but there are so many individuals I know that it does. I ask, why do you work so much? And they go, well, I don't really know what else to do. And it's like, okay, the evening rolls around, you're like, I could do these things, I don't know, I'll just work some more. And so if you're someone who stacks their schedule, I really want you to think as to why. Is life asking you to do that, or are you asking yourself to do that?
Yeah, that's a beautiful reflection question. I also see, and kind of go with me here because this my brain was firing as you were talking, is there's the authenticity piece is challenging to tap into because of all of these societal scripts around how we should be, what our performance should look like, how we need to navigate, like, the world, what the right way is to show up. And so that is the hustle, grind, and go, go, go mentality. And so if I think we were being authentic with ourselves, we would want to be slower, but because of the societal scripts, it just puts us into that mindset of autopilot.
In my book, I talk a lot actually about authenticity or our sense of self. And with the sense of self, I have a really sexy, unsexy description of it, where I'm saying the self is has three ingredients: choice, freedom, responsibility. That is the self. How you use your freedom and your choice, and how you take responsibility for your life, is who you are. There is no other thing that makes you you except how you show up in the world and how you decide to live your life. Um, and some people don't love that. They don't love that expression, but I think because life is asking you to to be a certain way, unless you're authentic, unless you can go, this is what I'm asked, but what do I actually want to do, you will get caught up in it, because that's what we were taught, that's what we were modeled, that's what we're expected to do. And it happens to all of us. I think the only way to slow down is to actually be authentic, in terms of to go, how do I want to actually use my time and what actually aligns with me in this moment. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, authenticity will be hustling, but we also know that rest is just as important as working hard, be it your physical exercise or your brain. The rest is just as important as the hustle itself. And so if you were authentic, I think you'll have a better idea of tuning into those moments and recognizing them and then honoring them. And at the end of the day, it's about using your freedom to make these choices. I know we feel like we're in a life that doesn't give us much choices, but we have more freedom than we think. I would argue a lot of the time. I think it's kind of, who do I want to become? Because you have so much power over who you become. And I think that's what we kind of forget. We think that, I think there are theories in psychology, so this can be a very existential thing, that present information in a way that makes it sound like you're determined. You're determined by your childhood, you're determined by your parents, you're determined by your environment. And although they do significantly impact who you become, I do not think that they determine who you become as a whole. I think they give you information, they give you hurdles, they give you wounds, they give you support depending on a bunch of factors, but you still get to decide who you are. And so I think we just need to make sure that we don't feel locked in by our past and understand that we have more freedom than we think. And when it comes to authenticity, the one thing that I do is redefine it. How would you define authenticity? Can I ask you?
The only way I can answer this is through bullet points because that's how my brain works. So, being honest with myself and others, it's being courageous, taking risks when there's not guarantee or certainty. To me, that's part of authenticity.
Mm, I love that.
Doing hard things when my brain absolutely wants to avoid and go down the easy path.
Mm,
And authenticity is showing all of my parts,
mm.
even the ugly parts of me. And I don't say ugly to be, demeaning or to be harsh on myself. I really do believe that there are parts of myself that, are wounded and tarnished and need a lot of love and healing and TLC. But if I'm being authentic, it's allowing all of that to shine. It's allowing all of that to be set on the table and say, here you go.
I love that so much. And what I love, love, love about your description of authenticity, it's very action forward. And it's very, I will use the word responsible. And I will now tell you why. Because a lot of people use the word authenticity and we don't know why we're using it or where it comes from. I think it's morphed its meaning over time. It's been a little watered down. I think it's been incredibly misused. um, and authenticity comes from Heidegger. It comes from a German word. And if you actually were to translate that word, it means to own, ownness. So that's such a fascinating reframe. To be authentic is to take responsibility for whatever action you decide to make. There is an example where a student comes to Sartre and is like, what is the authentic decision? And I won't paint the scenario because it's long. Essentially, he said, I can do one thing or I can do the other. And Sartre says, the thing that you decide to do is the authentic thing. And if you pair that with Heidegger's definition, is the thing you decide to take responsibility for is the right thing for you. And it's not so much about an ultimate right decision. It's the best decision to your capacity at that moment, and you're going to take responsibility for it. And I love it because I think that individuals use the word authenticity to avoid responsibility. They'll just be like, well, I was being authentic, Sarah. God, that's, I'm just being authentic. And I love it, but it's kind of like you can't touch me, you can't tell me that was wrong, I don't need to take responsibility for the consequences because I was just being authentic. And I think this kind of paints it in a slightly different light where yes, you can honor your alignment and your truth and make a deliberate decision, but you also need to take responsibility for that decision.
It's interesting for me that you bring in responsibility as part of one of the pillars of authenticity because I always am drawn towards accountability. Like when I think of taking responsibility, accountability is the word that comes to it. It wouldn't be naturally authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if I'm the only person who feels that or if potentially listeners are thinking, "Oh, when I think about owning something, that's accountability." But authenticity on the other hand is rawness,
Mm.
is being unapologetically yourself.
And I think it is. But I also think you need to own yourself. Authenticity in our standards is the ideal intimacy we can have with ourselves. To be authentic. But if you don't own this person you're having this intimacy with, if you don't own yourself, authenticity doesn't, to me, it's not the same thing. I want to own this person. They're mine. There's something very beautiful about that. And I think it can be very much paired up with the rawness and the vulnerability of it all. And I think that's what we talk about more often when it comes to authenticity. It's probably why most of us have that association. I know that was my association for a very long time, of being brave, of listening to yourself, of standing up for yourself, all of these wonderful things. But I think that to truly love something, we need to take responsibility for it. And I think that there's an ownership that we all truly want. You can look at people who date, who are trying to sometimes fill that hole. And the only thing that can fill that hole is that owning themselves, having that relationship and intimacy with themselves. And so this is what I do think this is one of humans' biggest desires to be their own.
Yeah. And just by the German definition of owning, it reframes it in a way of empowerment, or that's at least what's coming up for me, is I can acknowledge, take accountability for, name, quote, own whatever's happening within myself or outside of myself, whether that's based on choices I've made, behaviors I've engaged in, patterns that I get caught up in.
I love that you brought something up, and that is I have such positive associations with the word responsibility at this point that I need a gentle reminder that not everyone does. Because I'm always like, and you are responsible, and you're responsible. And to me, that's like the most empowering thing. And then I have to be like, oh, as a society, we don't have a positive association with responsibility because for us, that's blame. That's how we understand it. We understand it as blaming and shaming and everything else that comes with that, rather than now you're empowered. Now you're free. Now you get to, I mean, if you get to own that decision, you can own the next one. So you're more flexible. To me, when I became responsible, it was the first time that my life changed. It was the first time I wanted to actually live my own life. And so I see responsibility as the key to a fulfilling life. But I think if you're listening and you're like, that word is not for me, I think it's really helpful to go, what is my relationship with this word? How has it been used before? What examples do I think of when I think responsibility? Or, me taking responsibility and getting in trouble, or people in my life not taking responsibility, and just sit with it, because it's funny how words can just trigger us. And I think I want to take the word authenticity and responsibility back from mainstream. I'm like, I want to take them back. I want to change what they mean because they're such powerful words, and I am sad what has happened to them.
Yeah. Well, okay. For everyone listening, Sara owns authenticity now.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
You heard it here first. Yeah. Well, I think when I hear responsibility, my knee jerk reaction is dread.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think we naturally use response, like, I'm responsible for X. We don't say it in a positive way. It always has an undertone of like, "Ugh,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, just add it to the fucking pile."
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it's always like, I am trying my best not to fuck up. I have responsibility. I will try not to ruin things. And then it's like, how can I pass this responsibility to someone else? Even just the thought of, as you said, it's like, even the thought of being responsible for something now feels like weight has been placed on your shoulders, and you're waiting until someone else is responsible for that thing. So you're like, okay, cool, now it's your turn. Okay, not responsible anymore. And we do this in romantic relationships all the time, where you're like passing a responsibility for something, or friendships or family. And again, I think it's just the programming around the word responsible. Do you have an example where you were responsible for something, and the fact that you had the responsibility meant that you could make a decision that you wanted?
Well, when I think about I'm responsible for my dog, right, who's now buffing in the background, she wants to be heard and seen in the most authentic way.
Right.
I'm responsible for my dog. I feel really good about that because I own her and I love her, and she's like fiercely the most magical thing in my life.
I want a dog so bad. Okay, keep going.
People might be eye rolling, but I really believe that about my animal. You know, I'm responsible, and I'm so proud to be responsible for her. So that's an example that came to mind around. It doesn't feel dreadful. That feels like, heck yes, like she's mine.
It's liberating. Yeah. A little bit of my story, which people can read in my book if they're super curious about. And, I've lived through wars as a child. And then in my 20s, I had this breakdown. And it was interesting because up to my 20s, up to my breakdown, I lived the most checklisty, paper perfect life, right? There is not a person in my life that was like, hey, this might not be the right thing for you to do. Hey, we're a little concerned. Not a single person, because what I was doing was exactly what society wanted me to do. People were like, wow, awesome, you're killing it. I was killing myself. That's cool. No, no big deal. I was like, yes, great. The reason I didn't want that life is because it wasn't my own. And I took no responsibility for that life. Because what responsibility would I take? It was given to me. I took, like, it was like, do this. And I was like, okay, you don't have to take responsibility when someone tells you what to do. That was in my head. That's how we perceive it. Society told me to do it and I'm doing it. That's on them. That's not on me. And I think only when I went, oh, I'm responsible for the decisions I make, was that mind blowing. And not in, not in the terms of like, it was more, I get to decide. I am responsible for how I treat this human being. Like, I can do anything with her. For me, it was the liberation that comes with responsibility. We're only responsible when we are free. When we're not free to make a decision, we're not responsible for that decision. And so it was my gateway to responsibility was through the concept of freedom. I was like, oh my God, I can do anything. I can flip my life upside down if that is what's going to give me meaning. And that's exactly what I did. But spoiler. But I think my association with responsibility is not dread, it's freedom. So I just wanted to share an alternative.
I want to take a quick pause to talk about our sponsor, a company called BetterHelp. It's an online therapy platform where all the therapists are licensed and accredited professionals. It's affordable. You pay a low flat fee for therapy with your therapist, and it's convenient. Do it at your own time and at your own pace, and you can communicate with your therapist as much as you want and whenever you feel is needed. And more importantly, it's effective. Thousands of people have benefited from therapy using BetterHelp, and we're really grateful to offer all of our listeners 10% off your first month. So if you're interested in receiving therapy ASAP, click the link in our show notes and you can get started. And you get to save money. So, okay, coming back to authenticity. So I'm seeing authenticity and responsibility as a Venn diagram, right? There's overlap. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, for sure.
By being responsible, you are living by authenticity.
Responsible to who, though? Like, truly responsible to yourself, or just like the society is like, wow, she's responsible? Because that's not what I'm talking about.
No, I mean responsible to myself, responsible to the life that I choose to live.
And that's also the definition of authenticity, kind of, isn't it?
Yeah, but people don't talk about it that way, right?
Yeah, totally. That's what I mean. I was like, isn't it cool that that's kind of the definition itself as well?
No, it is. It is. Well, I'm having anyone who's watching the YouTube will see my brain's like, okay, so if we had to pause and ask ourselves one question that gets us closer to authenticity and its pairedness with responsibility, what's the golden question?
So I have a question that I think, I don't know how it pairs with authenticity, but I think it's a really good question. So I will give it to you and then think about the authenticity one. You can't have an authentic relationship or an intimate relationship or a close relationship with someone you don't know. Therefore, if you don't know who you are, this is, this is a really difficult task. Building intimacy with someone you don't know who they are, or wanting to take responsibility for a stranger, that's also a really tough one. We don't generally do that. My favorite question of all time is to ask, super simple, really hard to answer, what did I learn about myself today? The reason why this question is so hard is because it meant that you observed yourself today, that you were aware enough throughout the day to notice how you showed up in the world and what patterns you exhibited, or what you liked, or what you didn't like, what triggered you, what didn't trigger you. It's also phrases the question in such a way that says yourself is not static, your authenticity is not static. You're constantly going to have to learn who you are repeatedly, because who you are is evolving and changing all the time. And so it sounds like a super simple question, but I'd love you to try to answer it. What did you learn about yourself today? You're like, I hate her. Why is she here?
Oh, no. I love every part of you so far, and I've only known you for 25 minutes.
So sweet.
Okay, what did I learn today? Well, it's currently 3:07 PM in the afternoon. Okay, so there's more to learn because the day's not over. But I learned that I am still capable of jealousy, even though I pride myself on being the most, what I have deemed to be the most non jealous person ever.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's honest.
Yeah. And I don't like admitting that because I like really work hard to never experience jealousy. I have a very uncomfortable relationship with jealousy. I personally judge jealousy. When I see other people being jealous, I get cringy. I don't, maybe there's more for me on my own to unpack around that experience. But when I felt pangs of jealousy today, I was like, oh no, I thought I was like immune to this.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally get that feeling. But I also love it because I feel like if you have this strong narrative that you're not a jealous person, that's great. But if it's not a truly honest narrative, you're not truly seeing yourself fully. Like even if there is a 2% of you who still gets pangs of jealousy and that's something that you really dislike about yourself, I think this question is so wonderful because it's letting you see you whole. There's no escaping from you. And I love that. It challenges our inner narratives. It makes us be more honest, and it makes us more tangible to ourselves. And I think that although authenticity, is talked about very theoretically, I think it's a very tangible thing. I think it can be very tangible. And so I love this question. And I guess if we wanted to connect it to accountability, we can go, hmm, you can do an accountability follow up. Okay, what did I learn about myself? Is there something I need to be taking responsibility for? Or like, oh, I noticed that I really get triggered with my friend when they talked about X and then we got into a fight. It's like, is there something within that discussion that you need to take responsibility for? Maybe the fact that you were triggered, that maybe that played a really big role in how the rest of the conversation unfolded. But, it'll be different in every context. But I wonder if there is, I'm also processing just with you right now, if there's just like a follow up that can be responsibility related. It's like I observed this. How do I want to take responsibility for this piece of me that I observed? How do I want to take responsibility for that, pattern that I just saw unfold, whatever it is, and then really own whatever you saw because it's not just observing a part of you that maybe you didn't like, it's owning it. And same goes with noticing something super positive, like, wow, that I would have not responded like that 2 years ago, and today I did. And how can I own that?
So cool. Okay, so using my example, if what did I learn about myself today? It's that I am no different than any other human and I experience jealousy.
We love it. Yeah.
And the follow up of connecting authenticity with responsibility would be, what do I need to own or take responsibility for in this experience?
Hmm.
I'm trying to tap into this because it's never a question I've ever asked myself before. I think I need to take responsibility for, gosh, Sarah, you might have to help me with teasing this apart because it's a bit jumbled.
For sure. It's so hard. By the way, I'm so proud. I'm so impressed that you want to even try this.
Of course, this is the magic. I want to take something about my personality, and I've never admitted this to anyone. So here we go. Is that I like to feel that I am more advanced, more evolved, more X than the average person. I get really caught up in that. And maybe someone could label that as a bit like entitled or narcissistic. I don't want to put any of those labels, but There's this sense of, I like feeling like, oh, well, I'm better. I'm better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay, you're probably looking at me like I'm crazy here.
not at all.
So I need to take responsibility that I'm like not any better than anyone else.
I think it's important. There's so many people that feel the same way. I think this is a really normal thing to be like, I'm better than the average Joe, or I am more unique, or even my problem is something no one's ever experienced before. I hear this all the time. It's like, well, I don't know if you'll relate to this because no one has ever. And you're like, yeah, you and 100 other clients have experienced the exact same thing. And that's not to belittle the experience, but that's just to say, as humans, we yearn to be unique. And I think sometimes saying I am better can come from a place of um, so many reasons. Wanting to be unique, feeling like that's your safety is the fact that you're different and you're better. And I think, or because, I mean, there can be so many reasons. I think figuring out why you have this tendency, or anyone listening has this tendency to do something, is so important so that you can take responsibility for it. Um, because sometimes just being like, and now take responsibility for the fact that you're not better than anyone, it's not really in the spirit of ownness and freedom. It's more like punishment and blame. That seems to be more the like undertone there. And yes, I do think you should take accountability, but then how do you take accountability for something like that? That's more like, I shouldn't treat people less than me. That would be maybe the accountability piece.
Or maybe, as I said it to you, it was a healthy reminder to be humble.
Yeah, that's great. And being like, I need to be a bit more accountable. I need to make sure that I show up in a humble way that actually represents the reality of how I see myself and how I actually am. That could be the responsibility piece.
And when I think about, and this is the psychoanalysis piece, I grew up in a household where you had to be the best. And the only way to receive love was to be the best. It is very conditional for attachment for me. So when I feel like I'm experiencing jealousy, well, then I've just lost my best badge of honor. That's how it registers. And that feels unsafe to me.
That's powerful. And we all have, like, you now sitting with that, that's huge. From one simple question. And that's like, it's a tool of like really, but you need to approach yourself the way you just did. And I'm so glad you modeled it, because I don't think a lot of people get to see this. And it was so beautiful. You did it with such honesty and such openness and such vulnerability and safety for yourself. You're like, I'm going to take a moment. I'm really going to reflect on this. If you go into these questions with judgment rather than curiosity, it's game over. That is the wrong way to answer these questions. And so it's really being like, I have such a deep desire to know, and I don't care what the answer is. I will love and try to understand this person, but I just really want to know what they're saying. That is, I think, kind of the foundation of it all. And that's exactly what you just displayed in the most beautiful way. So thank you.
Okay, so what have you learned at 8:16 in the morning?
Well, not learned, reinforced. I actually want to say sometimes it won't be a brand new thing, but it'll be a reinforced thing. Um, you will know how you feel about certain people. When I came online with you, I automatically knew that this would be chill because my nervous system just relaxed. And I was like, I'm going to like her. This is going to be easy. And it was within minutes. And I was right, because now we're an hour in. And I think that's a really cool thing to sometimes also reinforce things about yourself, to remind yourself that, you do have this knowledge, or you do have the skill, or you can trust your intuition about certain things. And so today was a really cool thing where I was like, oh, within minutes, I was like, this is so great. And then, it was from the limited that I know you, I was like, wow, this was really, really lovely. And I'm just so honored to be here with you. And that's a really cool thing an hour later. So that's what I learned about myself, is that I can trust the way my body feels around people.
That's very special for you to say that to me. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for taking the time, for waking up at the ass crack of dawn to be with me, to sharing your magic, your knowledge, and your insights. And I'm really hoping that listeners can look at look at authenticity through a new pair of glasses. We've learned a lot through the internet of what it means and how it shows up. And today we touched on an aspect that I think has really been unspoken. I've never heard of this element of authenticity until this discussion. And I'm part of the mental health world, so that says something. But I'm hoping that listeners can view it, ask these questions really intentionally, and hopefully experience themselves, others in the world now through an accountable lens that enriches their lives, really.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me and for asking such wonderful questions. It's been really, really fun, and I hope the listeners enjoyed it.
Okay, we'll catch everyone later.